it's me. I'm all on my own because I've got vertigo. I woke up at 3 o'clock this morning and I turned over and voila, it was like I was on a bloody roller coaster. To anyone who's had vertigo or labyrinthitis, it's like waking up with the worst spinny, well, going to sleep with the spinnies, but without having had the night out. And it's really shit. So I've taken to my bed. And I'm lying here with all my notes around me, like, do you remember Bubbles DeVere, that character that was like a spoof on Barbara Cartland? That's what I look like. But I thought that I would, as I can't go anywhere, because I'm meant to be going, well, I am going, but not today, to my friend's birthday in the Cotswolds. But I can't travel like this because it just makes me feel so sick. So I've got to sit looking straight ahead, not looking right or left at all. And so I'm just putting that down there. Hang on a minute. Oh, God. Right. But thank you to my regular listeners our regular listeners of Juicy Crack, because it's really making a difference to us. And you seem to be liking the content. And as I say, I never know 1 week to the next what I'm particularly going to talk about. But the reaction and the response through your emails has been really, really encouraging and very, very touching. And I thank you very much for that. But one of the recurring themes that people seem to want to hear about is my childhood. And I've always said I had what I would deem and what my sister would deem is a very happy childhood. Wasn't perfect, but nothing is. But in all my people that I've seen over the years, because of my depression illness and everything, they always try to make something out of childhood. And I know that there are so many scars that kids have in childhood that never go away. I get that. But my depression was nothing to do with my childhood, which was really very, very loving. I came into the world on May the 22nd, 1958, and I was born at Tynemouth Hospital, which is now Tyne and Weir. And my mum and dad were just 22 years old. And I wasn't planned. I didn't quite know the origins of my conception until I was much, much later. But it had caused quite a stir in the family, because mum and dad were so young and they weren't married and dad was at university. So to my middle-class grandfather, this was not at all good. And it was pretty hard on my mum, I think. She was from a sort of Irish Catholic working class background. My grandmother, Margaret O'Brien, was a housewife. And my granddad had been a footballer in the days when footballers didn't earn much money. So granddad was actually called Jack Ridley, but because he lived in Mickley, they called him Mick. And he played for Reading, QPR and Man City, all at different times. But I think there was a little bit of snobbery with my grandpa, not with my nana, who was my dad's mum. My nana was a lady, Sarah. She was just, you know, those women that just ooze class. She just always looked gorgeous. She always had a beautiful sort of tapered pencil skirt and jacket, and always had a lovely bag. And I can always remember the smell of her, you know, that sort of rouge smell. And my grandpa, I loved my grandpa, but he was very, very strict, very strict. He spoilt my dad rotten. My dad was the youngest of three. There was David and Cynthia. David we lost a few years ago. Auntie Cynthia, oh God, my sister and I loved our Auntie Cynthia. She again was just, if there was any group that needed help, you know, if there was a depression group or a cancer group or anything, Auntie Cynthia was always at the forefront of it. She then went off with my Uncle David, her husband, to Kenya for many years, and they taught in schools in Kenya, and that's where she found her solace, and that's where she found her home. Two kids they had, Liam and Karen, our cousins. My Uncle David had Amanda and Martin. on that side of the family. And we saw a lot of each other growing up. So when I was born, Nana and Grandpa had a big house on the seafront at Cullercoats, which is near Whitley Bay. So you go Whitley Bay along to Cullercoats and then to Tynemouth. And they had this big house looking over the sea at Cullercoats. Whenever I feel low, I drive to that house on a little tour of the northeast, and to our other house as well. But my sister and I always go on this trip down memory lane whenever we feel a bit low. And when Dad was in hospital up there in 2021, I spent quite a bit of time just walking along that seafront, because it's still one of the most lovely stretches in the northeast for me. So there was this big house on Beverley Terrace, and Nana and Grandpa lived in the middle section of it, on like what you would on the first floor. On the ground floor, Auntie Cynthia had lived and did live sometimes with my cousins Corinne and Liam in the flat down there. Then there was another sort of, I guess what you would call a bedsit type of thing. And when I was born, my little grandma lived there, who was my great grandma. And any of you who watch Loose Women will hear the girls sometimes refer to me as Densie. And the reason that nickname stuck is because my little grandma couldn't say Denise. She tried with all her might and she couldn't say it. So she called me Densie. And we just left it at that. Apparently they just gave up trying to teach her how to pronounce it. So Densie it was. And it was a nickname that I didn't have for years, until I was reminded of it in my later years. I told them at Loose Women once. And after that, I just became Densie. And to most of the girls there. And even when the new girls come in, like Charlene, which is not that new now, but she just automatically calls me Densie. So I really quite like it now. But that's why. The other thing is, my little grandma, I do remember, well, whether I remember or whether it's just I've been told, I'm not sure. I do remember, I have got a memory of sitting in a high chair in little grandma's flat. I do definitely have a memory of that. But I used to hate anybody else making me eggs, because he used to say, I want crunchy eggs, Grandma, crunchy eggs, because she used to leave the shells in, because she was nearly blind, she couldn't see. And I used to hate anybody else make me eggs because they weren't crunchy. So little Densie started life in Cullercoats, and then so like I said, those were the flats on the ground floor. Then there was Nana and Grandpa's flat on the middle floor with these beautiful bay windows looking out. God, I have such vivid memories of that flat, looking out onto the seafront. And then upstairs again on the top floor was a little attic flat. Now, in my child's memory, that flat was quite big. It was like a normal size flat. And I can remember I had a toy cupboard, and one of my first memories is coming out of the toy cupboard and seeing my mum sitting on my dad's knee and screaming hysterically. Why? I don't know. What's wrong with seeing your parents showing love to each other? They were only bloody 25 by then. Well, not that there's any age to stop showing love to each other, but I came out and I remember seeing Mum and Dad's knee, and she was wearing cut-off, capri pants. And she had short, urchiny hair. She was dead stylish, my mum, and sitting on my dad's knee. And I went hysterical. And apparently I used to cry if mum sat on dad's knee, if my mum wore trousers, obviously an odd child. But mum and dad, they didn't have any money. Grandpa had insisted that dad left university to work in the family firm when mum was pregnant. This is what had happened. So the family firm was WELCH'S. Sweeties. Anybody from the northeast of a certain age will remember Welch's toffees, right? So there was two firms. There was my grandpa's firm, which was on Laburnum Avenue in Whitley Bay next to the police station. By God, if you turned into Laburnum Avenue, you smelt the toffee. God, I remember that vividly. And that was John W Welch and Sons, right? And that was the factory that made, when you go in the shop and there's the boiled sweets and there's the jars of toffee and you go, could I have a quarter of that and a quarter of that? Those sweets. Well, that used to make that. And they used to make this toffee called super butter toffee, and it was absolutely delicious. And I used to go to the factory on a Saturday morning because my dad often had things to do, paperwork and stuff at the factory. And so Debbie and I would go, well, Debbie wasn't, by the time Debbie was born, she's 3 years younger than me. We would go to the factory on a Saturday morning and the girls would be working there on the machines. And you just can't believe how sort of, not primitive, that's not the word, but how simple these machines were. And my grandpa, John William Welch, he invented the black bullet, the rolled mint. The nearest you'll see now is Jasmona do a rolled mint, but my grandpa invented the black bullet. And it used to come out like in a long sausage, and the girls used to cut and roll. I always do the actions, even though you can't see me. Cut and roll, cut and roll, cut and roll. They always do the actions. And I can remember with the black bullets, and they used to call me truly scrumptious. Do you remember from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang? Truly scrumptious, you're really truly scrumptious. And then there was the other one about the sweets. Toot sweet, the sweet that you whistle, the whistle you eat. And the school would not often, I remember it twice, but it maybe happened more, where they would ask my dad if they could do a school visit. And of course, I thought it was great, didn't I? When the kids would come and visit and it was my dad's factory. Well, my dad was actually just a glorified rep for the company, to be honest. But he didn't enjoy working there because he was too intelligent. He'd been training to be an accountant. I don't think he would have been happy being an accountant either, or even that good at it, to be perfectly honest. But it didn't really stretch him. Being a sales rep, but you needs must. He had a kid and then he had another kid. And so he had to, and mum had stopped working to look after us. So he had to bring the pennies in. And so the family business, it was. But he used to throw himself into his social life as a result of that. And that's where Raquel was born. That was where my dad's drag act started, because he was obviously not getting any kind of particular pleasure or, God, my vocabulary today. It's this bloody vertigo. It didn't turn him on working at the factory. So he threw himself into his social life, and they got invited to a party. So they were probably only about in their early 20s. They got invited to a fancy dress party. And so they decided that dad would go as a woman and mum would go as a man. Well, not really a man. She had a leotard on. She had fantastic legs, fishnet tights, a bow tie and a bowler hat, and a little sort of Liza Minnelli short haircut, so she looked amazing, but that was her attempt at being a man. Dad, on the other hand, mum dressed him in a shift dress. Remember the 60s shift dresses? This blonde wig that was styled, a headband, and mother did his makeup. And my dad was what you would have called a very pretty young man. And I've seen the photos. He looked bloody gorgeous. To be honest, he looked gorgeous. Better than probably a lot of the women at the party. Anyway, they went to this party, and dad being dad, he had everybody in hysterics, telling a few daft jokes and singing a few songs at the piano. He couldn't sing, but someone was obviously playing and he was singing along. And people started to then say, "Oh, Vin, would you come as a woman to our party? Would you come dressed as a woman to our party?" And because our surname's Welsh, and because of Raquel Welch, who was massively famous at the time, Raquel was born. And was a highlight and a bane of my bloody life all the way through. Because Raquel still existed till Pops popped his clogs. Just didn't look quite as gorgeous in his latter years, but he still loved it. He loved the attention. I asked him once, Dad, do you think because you do enjoy the whole thing of drag, and everybody associates it with, usually with men in drag being gay? And I said, because, if you had any gay leanings, it wouldn't be a problem to us. And he said, no, honestly, he said, I love your gay friends. I love being with, all people, but gay people. He loved the sort of being around the gay scene with us when we'd go to clubs and whatnot. And he just loved the attention he got in drag. And he loved it. But that was him. And mum, she wasn't as out there, but she enjoyed seeing she enjoyed seeing the effect that dad had on other people. It was funny, because mum and dad fought like cat and dog. They did. They argued a lot, and Debbie and I used to hate them arguing. And and they were very vocal even if there was people around, which I never think is a good thing. But Dad had a really quick temper, but then it would be forgotten and he would wonder why everyone thought he was a wanker. Nobody was speaking to him. But they had a love for each other, and Mum would always be moaning about Dad. But if ever she was out, she'd always be checking her phone and looking at the door to see if Dad was there. So they sort of they had an odd relationship, but they really did have a lot of love for each other. So that was where I lived until I was 3, and then when I was 3, we moved to Monkseaton. It's a little town outside Whitley Bay. And we bought a house there in Woodley Road, Monkseaton. And I thought we'd move to a mansion. It's funny because that's another one of our trips on memory lane. We always drive past Woodley Road and we look at how small the garden is. And that to us was like, it was like a bloody playing field, in our child's mind. And this laburnum tree, which is really not that big. Again, child's view, it was absolutely huge. But such happy memories of that house. And then Debbie came along at 3, and when I was 3, and again, an earlier memory is of Mum walking down the drive. Well, in my mind, it was a drive. It's a path, and I loved that baby. And Mum, very cleverly, to avoid jealousy and conflict, she sort of allowed me to be a little mum, And I felt like I was, it was like having a real life doll, a real life Tiny Tears, and I loved my sister, and that was it, and it's remained me and Debbie. My mum went on to lose 4 children. We didn't know about 3 of them because the miscarriages happened quite early, so we'd never known about the pregnancy. But the one that we did know about was when I was 9 and Debbie was 6. And I remember seeing Mum pregnant. I remember the excitement of the baby coming, the prospect of the baby coming. And then I remember the morning, Dad called us into the living room, and we were wearing our skating dresses because we used to go to the Saturday morning skating at Whitley Bay Ice Rink. And Dad told us that the baby wouldn't be coming home because, we didn't understand at the time, but Mum had had a stillbirth. There weren't the scanning machines, there wasn't the equipment, and it would have been a brother, and he would have had hydrocephalus, which is like water on the brain. But my mum had gone to full term, and that was hard. That was hard. So anyway, I'm spinning a bit with this vertigo, so I'm going to take a break and I'm going to resume in a bit. So my brother would have been called Christopher Lawn, and I've always loved that name, Lawn, and Lorne. But the love of the name was my love. It wasn't shared by Tim when we had the children. Anyway, so life went on, and we just used to have a lovely time. I mean, it was in the days when there was no sort of, God, when you think about it, health and safety and things in the car. I mean, I remember going on holiday with Mum and Dad's friends, Gwen and Mike. And I think Dad had was it a Wolsey car? A Wolsey? Yeah. Or was it an Avenger? Isn't it funny? JFT 836H. I can barely remember my own number plate now, and I can remember my dad's. EFT 383F. I think that was the one on the Wolsey. EFT 383F. Didn't even know I could remember that. Bizarre how your mind works. Anyway, going off to Spain on a holiday, and Mum was in the front of the car, and she would have her Players untipped cigarettes, and she would always have to travel with a box of beech nut chewing gum, like a wholesale box, She'd have a wholesale box of beech nut chewing gum that we used to get from the shop, McConville's and McAvoy's at the end of the road. And she would have a beech nut chewing gum. She'd have Wrigley's if she couldn't get beech nut, but she'd have a cob on if Dad didn't get a beech nut. And she'd have her fags. And mum and dad, obviously dad driving, mum in the front. Me, Debbie, Gwen and Mike in the back, travelling all the way to Spain. Oh my God. I've got a memory of waking up in France. They'd obviously stopped to go in and have something to eat, and Debbie and I were fast asleep outside in the car, and nearly pooing myself waking up. I mean, it just wouldn't happen now, would it? But it was just, they were just the days. And there was a holiday when we went to France, we went to Brittany, and I don't think it was the holiday with Gwen and Mike. I think it was another time, and we had a Sprite Alpine caravan. And if anybody remembers those caravans, they were sort of like a blueprint caravan, and they all had the same sort of orange curtains and everything. Anyway, so we had a Sprite Alpine caravan and we parked it on a caravan site, and we went down. I was only about 6. And I mean, I haven't got great recall of childhood memories, if you're thinking that. It's just these are the odd times that I do remember quite vividly. And so we were on the beach, and mum or dad had forgotten the camera. And literally the caravans, you could see them, they were just up this tiny little sand dune. And I said to mum, I'll go. And she said, do you know where it is? I said, yes, it's just there. This little girl. And so I went up the sand dune and I got lost. And I can remember the fear of being lost and everything looking the same. This whole sea of Sprite Alpine caravans. And the next thing I remember was this man who, in my mind, was like as if you would draw a French person when you were little, with a stripy jumper on, a scarf and a beret. I mean, he probably wasn't so stereotypical then, but in my mind he was. And he took me to a lost property office. And I can remember sitting on the side with my legs dangling over and my dad arriving and me being so thrilled to see my dad. And my dad was talking to the guy in French. And this is one of those stories where I can understand somebody going, oh yeah, oh God, yeah. I swear on my life, right? My dad used to speak fluent French. He was very good. And not for years he hasn't, but in those days he spoke really quite fluently. And he was talking fluent French to this guy. This guy was talking fluent French back to him. And Dad said in English, Whitley Bay. And this guy went, Whitley Bay? This guy had lived in France for 30 years. He was from near Whitley Bay in the northeast. And he had found me flailing around at this caravan park. Can you believe it? That's one of my first memories. We love hearing your comments. So if you listen to this podcast, I'd love it if you could leave a little review at the end of it, because it really does help us get it out and push it forward. I'm loving doing it. And from the responses, you're enjoying listening to it. So if you can, leave a little review. I'd be really grateful. Thank you. We never flew anywhere. We always sailed, and we just had some absolute belter holidays. The other memory that my sister and I both have is because my dad never swam, never, till the day he died, never swam. Just couldn't do it. Used to do all the actions, had the lessons, just used to go straight down. So whereas Debbie and I always know exactly where our fear of water comes from, because we didn't exactly have Man from Atlantis as our dad. So all of the other dads would be out in the sea or in the pool, you know, sort of splashing around with the kids and chucking them in and everything. And my dad would be sat on a rock near the beach with Disney armbands on. Yeah, so it didn't exactly, you know, instill you with much confidence. Anyway, it's quite hard to sort of do a brief autobiography here, but yes. So mum and dad always included us in everything, even when we lived in the tiny flat that I told you about at the top of my nana and grandpa's house. They never just went out and left us with babysitters and whatever. That flat became party central. And vague memories of lots of music and lots of people around. And I think that's what made me a sort of a party person to a degree, is that the house was always full of people. But yes, so we were always included in everything, and we always had a great time. When I was 11, I passed my 11 plus, which we did then, and I was meant to go to the local grammar school, but Mum and Dad thought that it wasn't going to be right for me. I think they thought it was too big and the classes were too big and I'd probably get in with a crowd and whatever they thought. So there was a deal on if you had been baptised Catholic, christened Catholic, and I was, to appease my grandma's side of the family, but never brought up as a Catholic. Never brought up as a Catholic. So I didn't know really anything about the religion. But La Sagesse Convent in Jesmond, there was a deal on. If you were Catholic, there was a deal on at the school. You could get a half price deal at this school, this private school. And so off I went with the whole uniform and the velour private girl's hat, and oh my goodness me. And I used to go on the train and the bus to school. I mean, honestly, when I think about it, so I was 11. When my kids were born and my kids were 11, my mum wouldn't let them out the lounge. Oh, Denise, where they're going, they're out the front door. It's like, Mum, they're at the farm, it's okay, he's 10 or whatever. And when I think I used to just get waved off in the morning, isn't it funny how things change? And I used to go and get this train from Monk's Eaton Station and then a bus across town to Jesmond. Wow. Anyway, I went to this school and I didn't have a clue what to do. I didn't know what a Hail Mary was. I didn't know how to take communion. I'd never had a first communion. I mean, and I just had to learn as I go. I mean, I don't even know if that's allowed, but I did. And I was fuming with my parents. I can hear my Geordie accent coming back because I'm talking about Newcastle. Oh, that's another myth as well. I never had a broad Geordie accent. Everyone sees me on telly sometimes and they go, where's her Geordie accent gone? I never, ever talk like this, like, do you know what I mean? Never. And so recently I found a clip of something I did at Tyne Tees when I was 23 years old. And I didn't have any trace of a Geordie accent, but I do pick up bits of it when I go home or when I'm talking to Geordies or even talking about Newcastle, clearly. So I went to La Sagesse Convent for 2 years and I hated it. Yeah, I hated the travelling. I hated the fact that I was always 5 minutes late in the morning. I got reprimanded every single time I went to do the register, even though I told them I couldn't physically get there before that. I didn't enjoy an all-girls environment. I remember Lorraine and Veronica. They were my two mates from there. And in fact, I did see Lorraine after all those years when I did my This Is Your Life. I'd lost touch with Veronica. But they were the only two girls I can remember from there. And I didn't enjoy the travelling and I didn't enjoy just being girls. So I begged and begged and begged, could I go to concert grammar school? And because we'd moved from the Whitley Bay area to Shotley Bridge, County Durham, so that Mum could go back to work at Prudhoe Hospital. And so we'd moved over there and the new friends I'd met had gone to concert grammar school. So I begged and begged and begged. So when I was 14, I started at concert grammar school and it changed my life, basically. Well, it changed the trajectory of my life because I was never very turned on by schoolwork. I was lazy. I was much brighter than my exam results ever showed because I was lazy. Nothing really turned me on until they were casting a play called Finian's Rainbow. And if you ever saw the film, it was Fred Astaire and Petula Clark. Anyway, I don't remember how I came to be involved. But I remember Terry Cudden, the drama teacher, telling me that I was going to be in it. And I got the part of Susan the Silent, who danced her way through the story. And at the end, she had one line, which was, "I love you." And on the second night, I dried because I was taking too much notice of other things going on. Anyway, that was like, when people say a light goes on and it was like my life changed. I'd found something that not only I loved, but that I was good at and I got praise for. And the next show that I did was I was cast as Abigail in The Crucible. And, oh God, I lived for rehearsals. I just lived for rehearsals. And then I remember when the school play was on, I had to go into the sort of final lesson with sort of like rags in my hair for the curls. And we used to have to leave halfway through the last lesson. And oh God, I just remember the excitement. Anyway, I played Abigail in The Crucible, and I was obviously quite good in it, and it was praise that I'd never had before, and the headmaster asking to see me, to compliment me and stuff that I'd never had with anything academic. But funnily enough, because the school I went to, which was Concert Grammar, then Blackfine Secondary, now not there at all, I didn't ever think beyond teaching drama. So when we were 17 and I'd done various school plays, and I was about 17 and we started to apply for colleges, I was applying for teacher training college. And I remember I wanted to go to Alsatia College near Crewe because that's where my friend Jill was going. And Jill Hewitson was my best friend at school, and she was going to Alsatia, and that's where I wanted to go. So I applied there. And then my dad and my drama teacher, Terry, said to me, "Why don't you apply to drama school?" And it wasn't even something that I'd considered. Of course, when I got to drama school, I realised I was in the minority. All of the other parents had been going, "Oh my God, why don't you get a normal job? Why don't you be a teacher?" Mine were the other way around. So my dad was in amateur dramatics, and he was working with this actor called John Barber. And his son, Paul Anthony Barber, who went on to marry Glynis Barber of Densie and Makepeace fame, he was at Mount View Theatre School in North London. And so I didn't apply to any others. I applied to Mount View Theatre School. I got an audition. I remember my mum and dad taking me down to London, dropping me off outside the theatre was in Crouch End then. And me sitting on a bench waiting for my turn, so terrified. Anyway, I walked in, I did my audition. I can't remember what I did, but you had to do a Shakespeare piece and a modern piece. And then they picked me up and we went home. And when I got the letter to say, "You have been accepted to Mount View Theatre School," I could not believe it. And I actually rang the drama school to see if they'd, that this was kosher. There was no, that this was absolutely verified, because my name, I can't remember if I said this, but when I was christened, my name is Jacqueline Denise, okay? My mother, she'd been to Calais twice, and she had this French thing going on. And so she thought that Jacqueline Denise were two lovely French names, but the Jacqueline Denise flowed better than Denise Jacqueline. Right, can you believe it? And so it's been the bane of my life, because I was brought up as Denise, because they wanted to call me Denise, but put the Jacqueline in front. So there's been times when people have been going, Jacqueline, and I haven't known what they're talking about. Anyway, because it had Jacqueline Denise at the top of my letter from Mount View, I'm thinking, oh my God, they've got me mixed up with another Jacqueline. It's not me. Anyway, I phoned and it was me, and the rest is history. I was absolutely over the moon. Well, especially because it meant that it was an unconditional offer as well. So I didn't have to get any A-levels. And so I failed my history. I got drama. Well, it was drama OA level we had then. And off I went to drama school, and that was it. I did 3 years at Mount View, made some great friends, loved a lot of it, hated a lot of it. was thinking of leaving in the second year because I just didn't want to, I didn't buy into the bullshit side of drama training. I didn't want to be a tree. I didn't want to stand with my hands not touching the other people's and other people going, oh my God, I feel this amazing energy and all of that kind of stuff. It just wasn't for me. I just wanted to get the play, rehearse it and put it on. And I didn't used to revere the classics in the way that some people did. I didn't really have any desire to do the classics. I wanted to do more contemporary stuff. But one day we had this teacher called Chris Gilmore, and he'd given us a piece of Greek tragedy to do. And I had to do this piece where I was sort of doing it and wailing over my dead son and crying and everything. And I produced real tears and I did it. And he was going, oh, you're wasted in kitchen sink drama. The classics for you, my girl. And I remember thinking, but I didn't find doing that any more difficult than doing, I didn't find doing the classics any more of a stretch. It was quite natural to me, but it wasn't something that my heart was in. I wanted to do the more contemporary kitchen sink dramas. Anyway, I left drama school when I was 21. I was out of work for 9 months because in those days it was a catch-22 situation. You had to have an equity card to work, but you couldn't work without an equity card. So every repertory company or children's theatre company in the country used to have 2 equity cards to give every year. So you can imagine how many people leaving drama school wanting equity cards that was. And so I was 9 months out of work. I was waitressing. I was stuffing envelopes because I didn't ever do a secretarial course. So I was always in the clerical department. I was working in the hospital's clerical departments. You were signed up with several sort of temp agencies, And that's just what you did. I had to earn some money, and Mum and Dad had helped with my grant, but that was that. Then I had to be out on my own, and so I was out of work for 9 months. But then I'd somehow managed to secure a little job teaching dance. I'm not even a dancer. Teaching dance to kids, to the Saturday kids at Watford Palace Theatre. Again, I have no idea how that happened, and they told me that they had an equity card to give. In the meantime, I had auditioned for Live Theatre Company in the Northeast, of which Tim Healy, my kid's dad, was a founder member. So I had been up there and auditioned with Tim Healy. We didn't get together for years after. And I was living in a flat. Well, it was a bedsit in Palmer's Green. And outside the door was the joint phone box, where everybody used. And I remember this phone ringing and going to the phone and being told that Live Theatre had offered me an equity card. And 5 minutes later, going to the phone and Watford Palace Theatre had offered me an equity card. And I had been out of work for 9 months and I got offered 2 within 5 minutes. But it sort of took the fun out of it because I had to make a decision. Anyway, boy, oh boy, how sliding doors can change things. I chose the London one because I was then going out with a guy in London. And you know what you're like at that age. You don't really want to go away if there's a choice. So I didn't do Live Theatre Company. And subsequently, I didn't work with them for about 9 years. But things would have been very, very different in my life if I had. So yes, that was a little snippet of my childhood. So that kind of takes me up to being about 21 and my first job. So if anybody's interested, I will continue doing these sort of little life journeys, I suppose. But right now, I've got to go and pick up my piano that Matty bought me for Christmas. That's been at his house ever since. But I wanted a piano, I wanted a keyboard, so he's got me one and it's been there. So we're going over to pick that up and getting ready to go off to Dubai on Friday. Lincoln's got some business out there, so I'm going to tag along and have a holiday. So I hope you have a great week, and I hope you've enjoyed listening to what I can remember from my childhood. All right then, lots of love. Bye. So guys, if there's anything that you've ever heard me talking about that you'd like to hear more of, or indeed anything you can suggest that me, DK and Lincoln can bring to the table, contact me on denisewelchpod@gmail.com. And indeed, if you've got any questions, ask away. We'd love to hear from you.